Good morning, creative writing students. It's nice to see you, and I hope you had a good spring break. Because we have such a short week this week, we're going to do a little bit of pre reading about writing short stories now that we've graduated on from flash fiction to some longer short stories. So next week, we'll actually start reading some sample stories and then doing writing exercises. And then the week after that, you'll work on your own original short stories. So this week is going to be a little bit about craft, and what craft is in writing is basically technique. So in your English classes, you're often reading for things like metaphor and character, and you're kind of deeply analyzing all of those things. Well, as a writer, you need to read stories in order to figure out how to craft them or make them yourselves. So the way that you think about writing is going to change a little bit from your English classes to be more about how do these authors make us care about these characters, and how do they give them sort of deep emotional lives and responses to what's going on in the world around them. So the first reading we're going to start with is Story the Brain's Decoder Ring, which you can see on the screen in front of you. And there's a quote by Ursula K. Le Guin, who is a great science fiction writer. And she says, "There have been great societies that did not use the wheel, but there have been no societies that did not tell stories." And this reading comes from a book you can see right here. It's kind of bright. There we go. Called Story Genius: How to Use Brain Science to Go Beyond Outlining and Writing a Riveting Novel by Lisa Crone. And I'm going to read a little excerpt from it that comes from the preface and is not in your reading. And it's essentially about how we are wired for stories as humans. We like to hear stories, we know how they should be structured, but sometimes we have to think about how a story works and why it works in order to be able to tell good stories ourselves. So here is the excerpt if you'll listen along with me. Humans are wired for story. We hunt for and respond to certain specific things in every story we hear, watch, or read. And they're the exact same specific things regardless of the genre. Why is this so? Because story is the language of the brain. We think in story. The brain evolved to use story as its go to decoder ring for reality. And so we're really expert at probing stories for specific meaning and specific info. And I mean all of us, beginning at birth. Even a kindergartner recognizes an effective story because it's built into the architecture around of the brain. Story is how we make sense of the world around us. It's a system that predates written language by eons. Heck, before spoken language, we grunted and signed in story. I'd wager that early in the morning, the cranky among us still do. What drives a story forward is, at first blush, invisible. It's not talent, it's not voice, it's not the plot. Think electricity. The same way even the most powerful lamp is useless unless it's plugged in. A story can't engage readers without the electricity that illuminates the plot, the voice, and the talent, bringing them to life. The question is, what specifically generates that juice? The answer is it flows directly from how the protagonist is making sense of what's happening, how she struggles with, evaluates, and weighs what matters most to her, and then makes hard decisions, moving the action forward. This is not a general struggle, but one based on the protagonist's impossible goal to achieve her desire and remain true to the fear that's keeping her from it. As we'll explore in detail, story is not about the plot or what happens. Story is about how the things that happen in the plot affect the protagonist and how he or she changes internally as a result. And so when I was in graduate school for creative writing, I had a professor named Jennifer Dubois, and she's a novelist, and she kind of explained it this way, and I think it's really helpful, is you have the plot, right? You talk about the story arc of what externally happens in the story, what's the action, and that's important. But the other main part of the story is what is the internal plot, right? So for everything that happens externally in a story, it affects the protagonist, and the protagonist changes a bunch of times. They might be small changes, they might be bigger changes, but really we're invested in a